Hi, ladies and gentlemen. You're listening to or watching the live version of the public comment podcast. These are a few extra seconds of time before the official audio recording starts, because I'm going to start filming these or return to filming these, but with an emphasis on the podcast concept and just leaving video because it's good marketing, because you might come across it on YouTube, because YouTube is considered like the second Google, those kind of things. And it's easier to do it on YouTube than on Facebook because, number one, YouTube video quality is about a trillion times better. Okay, I'm being a little bit hyperbolic, but it's a lot better. And it'll upload faster. And I think that's it. So today I've got an interesting show for you, interesting topic, because I'm going to continue on the conversation I've been having about moving someplace better and the various steps I've taken to try and find a suitable place to live, as it's been a question of mine, where is it I'd like to live in the world, for an extremely long time. So I'm just returning there, and you're getting a sort of behind the scenes look here on the YouTube video as I wait to start the audio track, just doing lots of different kinds of experimentation and stuff. And so here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Public Comment Podcast, where I like to chat about philosophy and politics for creative, critical, and introspective thinkers. Yes, I do. And today I will be chatting with you about the ongoing story of my quest for living someplace that I like. Living Someplace Better is sort of the name of this ongoing series of particular podcasts and vlogs. To catch you up, because this would be part 11 now, to catch you up sort of what I was talking about in part 11, I was talking to you about the impact that the Beat Poets had on me, because they really changed my entire world, and how that influences, yes, where I end up geographically. I can't say what it is for everybody in life and what shapes them and how they get shaped. What are their most fundamental influences? For a lot of people, it's their parents. For others, it's religion. We all have our various, just trying to move the mic and have it in a perfect place. And my webcam too, trying to do all things at once here. Different influences, different reasons why we do things are out there. And sometimes our moves are more staunchly ideological or philosophical. For me, my quest for a place to live in life, and a place that I like to live, that I find enjoyable to live, has been very values based, has been very philosophical in my contemplations. And in fact, I've spent the better part of my life actually contemplating the subject of living someplace really wonderful, and being encased in a geographical surrounding that I find aesthetically very wonderful and pleasing, as well as having a place that sort of consists of values that I relate to. So I was talking in part 10 in the last segment. I had been speaking about how I ended up in South Beach and what's going through my mind philosophically in South Beach, and how being in South Beach, the South Beachness sort of plays this role, or my notion of the South Beachness plays its role in the way that I'm thinking about things, and how I slip into this nihilism and fatalism and determinism and this weird view of romantic love that I possessed. And then I talked you through how I start developing sort of in an ontological way, really, or psychological way, establishing a sense of identity, and that it really starts with the story of finding an interest in John Travolta, to the Bee Gees, Alanis Morissette, and J.D. Salinger, the Rolling Stones. But then there's this drastic change of artists that I exposed myself to, specifically with Charles Bukowski and the Beat Poets, leads me to be much more hyper-focused on free verse poetry and the idea of what it means to be a poet, and start developing philosophical, aesthetic notions of what poetry should be, or what writing should be, and who I should be as a person. So there's a lot of implied philosophy through my interaction with the writers and poets that I start to explore. And though I didn't think of it at the time as explicit philosophy, in hindsight, it would come to be so as I look back on it. And so I was talking you through in the last video, even more specifically than the experience of Charles Bukowski and the Beat Poets, and really it's Ginsberg and Kerouac really changed my mind. A little bit more context here, though. It's really important to understand that throughout my childhood and adolescence, it's not as if I was really a deep explorer of literature. It's not as if I was a deep explorer of the arts. I was very much more interested exclusively in movies and screenplays. I read the occasional horror novel, and I listened to a lot of Bee Gees music or pop songs and romantic song lyrics and things, but I didn't really go on a quest to become a sort of expert in literature. If I was going to be an expert in anything, especially as a teenager, it would have been movies. I did know my movies. I knew my John Travolta movies. I knew John Travolta's acting and career probably better than I knew anything. And I knew, I read Entertainment Weekly every week. I was subscribed to awards every year, the Golden Globes. I watched Access Hollywood and Entertainment Tonight every night. I was entrenched in that realm more so of entertainment than I was of the arts as a teenager. And only as I started in college, really with my exploration and fascination with Kerouac and Ginsberg, only then is my brain and consciousness suddenly becoming more deeply inundated with a world that was otherwise pretty much a world much outside of conventional pop entertainment, pop culture, or mainstream pop culture, I guess you could say. And this is really the first time that I'm ever exposed to counterculture, really. It's the counterculture of the 60s that I was really exposed to in my freshman year of college. And that's really important to me, that my whole life, I've never really been exposed to this concept of counterculture, or what, you see, first of all, I wasn't very social as a teenager. So it's not as if I was even exposed to like this variety of, what do you call them, cliques of different people. I pretty much kept to myself, with the exception of four really brilliant individuals, one of which my wonderful friend Tim Moran, the writer, director, and actor. I'm sure he wouldn't mind being named, otherwise I try to keep those people as anonymous as is reasonable. So from being someone who's like very much sort of mainstream culture, Hollywood, entertainment, even in my music taste and the lyrics or poetry of the music, it's always sort of like the pop rock lyricists, or Eminem or Tupac, the occasional rapper, some country music, but that's it. Then plunging into Allen Ginsberg and Jack Kerouac, and this idea of a counterculture, this idea of being really rebellious, and this idea of these individuals who share their thoughts on their vehement disagreements with the conventional standards they consider sort of imposed on them or expected of them, and they sort of want to really remake the world. And this is really the first time I'm exposed to that kind of thinking, that sort of staunchly rebellious thinking. And the atheism of Allen Ginsberg is a really good example. Even for a lack of better terms, the language that comes out of the mouths of Bukowski and Ginsberg in particular, right? Because Ginsberg especially is talking very frankly and explicitly about sex, homosexual sex, heterosexual sex, and he's talking very explicitly about drugs, hallucinogenics, and things that, in my sheltered mind, are considered like bad. He's talking about all these bad things, and you start to wonder, are they really so bad? This guy's such an intellectual. Maybe these things that all your life that are considered bad are actually not so bad. Of course, he's got that line in Howl, I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed by madness. And I just never really paid enough attention to that part where he talks about those minds being destroyed and what he meant by that. When I was young, I couldn't fully let the words sink in. But that part where he says the best minds in my generation, that blew my mind. This idea of the best minds of a generation and a generation of people, those people within a generation who are specifically interested in being smart, or specifically interested in being revolutionary artists and thinkers and producers and things like that, really became this exciting concept to me. And I was really jealous of the friendship between Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg, and how they were always the stories of them sharing their work together and sharing their thoughts and just having these really intense friendships. And a real part of my psychology then at this point is like wishing that I could find somebody out there that I could have this sort of deep intellectual relationship. Well, hey, if I was a Kerouac, I wanted a Ginsberg, or if I was a Ginsberg, I wanted, my version of a Kerouac. And so that's where, people like Tim Moran and a few of my other friends, I often try to think of them in that way, and begin to just think of the world like I'm out there in search of the best minds of my generation. Was how I began to think about things because of Allen Ginsberg. And so that means also scouting the best minds of the past generations, so that I sort of understand what, the kind of people that I would want to be associating with, essentially. So this is when I grow exposed to also the other side of the counterculture, because there's the beat poets, and then there's the people in the music industry who also become very counterculture and poetic. And those people include John Lennon, Bob Dylan, and Jim Morrison are the top three for me. Three people who really are part of this really revolutionary experience of my mind, right? Keeping in mind, I spent my adolescence a Bee Gees fan. The Bee Gees and Nickelback are like my top, Alanis Morissette, they're like my top examples of lyricists. No disrespect to any of those artists, but they're not necessarily, they don't really go about necessarily pushing any envelopes, you might say. With the exception, I think there's something really thrilling about Alanis Morissette writing songs that really don't rhyme all the time. I think that's really cool. But beyond that, there was nothing like extraordinarily unconventional about the artists that I was fascinated with in my pre-college youth, save maybe Marlon Brando, who was sort of rebellious, refused to accept the Academy Award and had a Native American come and refuse the award for him at the Oscars. That's sort of really the only major example. So, how does this all happen anyway? I don't know how it all comes together, but I remember my older brother actually saying that if you want a poet, you should probably listen to Bob Dylan and Jim Morrison. So, I don't, Matt, maybe it's somewhat your fault. You get a little bit of the blame, a little bit. And there's, Simon and Garfunkel, and there's this, I don't remember exactly how I get exposed to the hippie concept, but there's also no understanding me and my evolution without understanding my embracing the hippie concept. Again, I'm not exactly sure when and how that exactly happened. It's outside of my knowledge. I know around the time frame that I sort of went hippie. I mean, by the beginning of my freshman year at Kean University, I was growing out my hair for the first time, growing a beard, and start tie-dyeing my clothes, ironing patches on my clothes, things like that. Oh my, I must plug in my computer here. If you'd be so kind to just bear with me a second here, ladies and gentlemen. You have to understand, but I should have made this clearer. I apologize. You see, when I was a kid, when I was a teenager and even younger, I was a very sort of conventional guy, ultimately. I mean, minus my atheism and my super shyness and I guess my obsessive approach to my artistic interests, I was still a pretty conventional guy. By that I mean I didn't do anything radical, say, with my hair. I almost always just got a crew cut from at least, oh God, I don't know, like 11 years old through 17. Tim will vouch for that. My siblings, it's like always cut my hair. I was shaved. Well, I didn't have much to shave, but when it came time that I must, I did. And there was nothing radical about my appearance. I probably dressed preppy to the best of my memory. I think I wore khakis and nothing exciting by way of shirt. I didn't really put much thought into my fashion. The first time I really made any kind of fashion statement to any degree, I was probably about 16, and I started wearing Hawaiian shirts, kind of like this actually. And I sort of had like some of my earliest sort of philosophical ideas or ontological ideas and thinking about the kind of person I wanted to be. And I thought of myself as wanting to be someone very festive, someone who wanted to be by the beach, right? This whole theme comes back to the question of, where do I want to live? And the ultimate theme of this series of podcasts. So I start thinking about that in terms of my style. So I start with the Hawaiian shirts, and then I get into start wearing this necklace, like a seashell necklace, and go on vacation once a year to the Rehoboth Beach Boardwalk, and you'd see some people, wear the hemp necklaces, and I thought that was very cool, and the bracelets. And so there's a sort of like beachiness, that style that I become very attracted to. And I don't know where I start falling into the whole like Paul Simon or Simon Garfunkel and John Lennon and Bob Dylan and Jim Morrison thing, and grow exposed to the hippie thing. I I've been wrapping my mind around trying to figure out how exactly I got exposed to those to the hippie thing. I just don't remember where. But at some point, between the summer between graduating high school and starting Kean University, into my early months at Kean University, I really started embracing this idea of being a hippie, because I was very attracted to the peace and love mantra as a fundamental principle. It was the first time I ever really tried to wrap my mind around ethics by way of some kind of abstract fundamental principle, peace and love. I was very attracted to that. And I was very attracted to the sense of freedom that the so-called hippie movement was supposed to embody. And I became very attracted to the music. And so, yeah, at the suggestion of my brother Matt, I started listening to Bob Dylan. I started listening to Jim Morrison. And I grow interested in musicians around that time period. And therefore, I started listening also to, did I say John Lennon, Simon and Garfunkel, and some of the jazz too, because the beat poets are talking about the jazz and I want to understand them more. So I start listening to like my Miles Davis and Johnny Coltrane and things like that. And this, like a persona, notions of persona start inundating my mind as I think about these various artists. And the one who really starts to influence me very heavily at this point is actually not Dylan or Morrison. I really don't get interested in them for very intensely that year at Kean University in Union, New Jersey at 18, my freshman year. It's actually really Paul Simon and John Lennon that really, really fascinate me. With Paul Simon, it's this sense of chillness or Simon and Garfunkel, it's this sense of chillness. And I remember there was this hippie girl. Her name was Jess Mill. And I had this sort of a crush on her. She dressed like a hippie. So maybe it was actually her where I really grew exposed to the hippie concept. I don't know. But she was the first time I think I'd ever seen someone dressed like a hippie. I don't remember exactly what that was now. Like I'm trying to visualize her face and I can't see what in her clothes. I'm trying to see like what made me say she would be a hippie. I don't know. Tie-dye, I'm sure. And she worked at one of the dorms at Kean University. The person who sort of like checks the ID card and lets someone in and out. And she exposes me a lot to Simon and Garfunkel. And I know one of the lyrics that blows my mind at that time that I really embrace, it's the song Feeling Groovy. It was her favorite song. And I don't know, that song really, it was so anti the original Sean. And you have to understand that I was really trying to, a major part of the hippie thing for me was like having some experience of self and makeover too. I didn't want to be the old high school Sean who always hated himself and had no self-esteem, no real social life, no real life outside his obsession with movies and songs. So exposed to the Simon and Garfunkel, and I just really wrapped my mind around it very intensely. Slow down. You move too fast. You got to make the moment last. I was like, wow, that's so profound and so true. Right? So for the first time, poetry or self-expression through Simon and Garfunkel is actually like serving a real purpose. It's speaking to something I can relate to. What is it? Let's see if I can get the lyrics to that. Hey, something about the lamppost. Hey, lamppost, what you knowin', love to watch your flowers growing. Is that it? Let's Feeling Groovy. Feeling Groovy lyrics. Yeah, slow down. You move too fast. You got to make the morning last. Just kicking down the cobblestones, looking for fun and feeling groovy. Ba-da-da-da-da-da, feeling groovy. This next line. I think she used to cite this on one of her live journals or something, but I just thought it was such a cool line. Hello, lamppost, what you knowin'? I've come to watch your flowers growing. Ain't you got no rhymes for me? Doo-doo, feeling groovy. It was so a sense of like feeling at peace. And as someone who always experienced a lot of depression, anxiety, and self-loathing, that was very attractive to me. And there was something so innocent about that too. I got no deeds to do, no promises to keep. I'm dappled and drowsy and ready to sleep. Let the morning time drop all its petals on me. Life, I love you. All is groovy. Amen. That's how I felt. That's exactly how I felt. Life, I love you. All is groovy. And that's just the way I wanted to walk around all the time. Life, I love you. All is groovy. Life, I love you. All is groovy. Life, I love you. All is groovy. And I wanted to say to everybody I know, I love you, man. Peace, yo. Peace and love, yo. I love you. All is chill. All is groovy. That's just the way I start to think. And so I'm inundating myself with Simon and Garfunkel. And then I start inundating myself with John Lennon. John Lennon was exceptionally appealing too, because just like Allen Ginsberg, he was an atheist, and he was staunch in his atheism. John Lennon became to me almost like a god for a very brief period of time. And God by John Lennon. The lyrics blew my mind away, because he was speaking to me what no one else on earth had the courage to say, right? So he's saying, God is a concept by which we measure our pain. I'll say it again. God is a concept by which we measure our pain. I thought, yes, you are telling the truth. You're speaking to my atheism with such a profound and perfect explicitness that whatever it is you're doing, I need to know you. And so I begin to inundate myself with John Lennon lyrics. And then he says, and I found this to be amazing too. He says, after he says that little blurb about God, right? Then he says, I don't believe in magic. I don't believe in I Ching. I don't believe in Bible. I don't believe in tarot. I don't believe in Hitler. I don't believe in Jesus. I don't believe in Kennedy. I don't believe in Buddha. I don't believe in mantra. I don't believe in Gita. I don't believe in yoga. I don't believe in kings. I don't believe in Elvis. I don't believe in Zimmerman. I don't believe in Beatles. I just believe in me. Yoko and me. And that's reality. The dream is over. What can I say? The dream is over. Yesterday, I was the dream weaver, but now I'm reborn. I was the walrus, but now I'm John. And so, dear friends, you just have to carry on. The dream is over. I thought, oh my God. So a lot of like revolutionary intensity, you must understand, is going through my mind. John Lennon with the sort of, as I perceive it, philosophical aggressiveness, atheism, believing in the self, and expressing oneself freely. Bukowski being very open about sexuality and one's imperfections and one's sloppiness, and Ginsberg being high all the time, seeming, and cursing and being very sexual and into his atheism, and Kerouac wanting to hitchhike America, and Kerouac wanting the sense of freedom to explore the world. My mind is being inundated by all of this. Keep in mind, these are all things I'm contemplating not in actual college classes. So it's not like I'm free to have these intellectual discussions with the brilliance of a professor sort of helped me curate and process all of this in a more conventionally academic way, or in a more, I don't know, methodical, or I guess the point is that I did not do all this contemplation with any kind of supplementary contextual instruction from those who were the scholars on these people. This was all stuff I was just, all of my free time, I'm wrapping my mind around it and trying to glean how to be based on these artists, how to be and how to produce art because of them, and what that means in terms of what I'm supposed to want in my life. Then, I start doing more explorations. I get really into Percy Shelley, another atheist. And Percy Shelley starts leading me to feel very confused, because Percy Shelley is a romanticist, and Percy Shelley does not speak in that sort of blunt way that Bukowski or John Lennon express themselves. Percy Shelley, music when soft voices die, vibrates in the memory. It's very romantic and beautiful and flowery and eloquent. And this is the first time in my life where I'm starting to wrap my mind around a sense of like a real aesthetic conflict, and the challenge of asking myself whether I want to have sort of more of a romantic approach to the world around me, or if I want to be more realistic in how I process the world around me. And then this is all happening around my freshman year. Then that summer, I start to wrap my mind a lot around The Doors, Jim Morrison, and Bob Dylan. And this shakes me up even more radically in a lot of ways. I guess I'll start with Bob Dylan. I should begin by saying that aside from, I don't know, maybe John Lennon, Bob Dylan is probably my favorite poet. I'd say John Lennon and Bob Dylan are probably my favorite poets. And I like Bernard Foyth too. And you should check out the poetry of Bernard Foyth. He's a genius. A friend of mine. Bob Dylan. There's so much for me to say about Bob Dylan. I wouldn't know where in the world to start. When I first started listening to Bob Dylan, I thought, like, this is cool, but it didn't immediately, I didn't have that special resonance yet. It was like, yeah, this is chill. I could sing along with it. I appreciate what he's saying, but I hadn't yet gotten what I would call the chills. Bob Dylan is one of the few artists out there to give me utter chills. If you check out publiccomment.blog, my website, and you can review my personal essay on the homepage, and I cite 2 passages from Robert Musil. That's an example of artwork that gives me the chills. Speaks so vividly about something so true that at least I could relate to on a very visceral and deep, intense level that I got the chills. This would be the case with Bob Dylan. So I will tell you the story. It's one that in my several attempts to write a novel and or write my autobiography or a memoir or something, I've sort of gone back to this in my mind like many a time, and I remember it pretty well. So at this point, it's the summer of 405. It's the summer of 2005. And I am no longer a student at Kean University. I will be soon transferring to Florida Gulf Coast University. We've talked about how this would be the first time I ever really do something I sort of want as a young adult, sort of. And so that's a little bit of context. I'm still living in my mom's house. It's like a month probably before I'm going to move to Florida Gulf Coast University in Fort Myers, Florida. And I liked to play Bob Dylan in the background. Sometimes I would just go to sleep listening to Bob Dylan. He was so revered. There was such a, when I would read up about him on the internet or hear people talk about Bob Dylan, it was always like, oh, he's such a deep poet. He's kind of hard to understand. There was a air to the way people spoke about Bob Dylan. And, I'd heard the name as a younger person. Oh, Dylan, he was a real poet among the songwriters. He's that guy you hear about all the time. You never really plunge into. So I thought, whatever he has, I want it too. I want to be a genius like Bob Dylan, right? So I said, if I can't understand him, I'm just going to listen to him all the time. And so I would listen, specifically, I'd play the Blonde on Blonde album late at night. And I remember there was this one particular song. Two particular songs really gave me the chills, one more than any other. Perhaps you know it, perhaps you don't. If you don't, check it out. Sad-Eyed Lady of the Lowland. I remember laying in bed late in August and hearing Dylan and the way he sang it. Sad-eyed lady of the lowlands, just like that. And there's like, it's evoking all these weird thoughts in my mind. One of them is, wow, there's something so genius sounding about this guy. Another is, I wonder if he's like mad high on heroin or something. I just was wondering it. And he's got this line, my warehouse eyes, my Arabian drums. I'm thinking, my warehouse eyes. Whoa. I felt like I could relate to that idea of having warehouse eyes. As if you're looking so deeply all over and all around you and taking it in so intensely. And that's just who you are. And I thought, he understood the way that I think, or the way that I try to think, and having warehouse eyes, having really expansive consciousness, for lack of better terms. And I just got these chills, and I thought, wow, whatever it means to make good art, whatever it means to write good poetry, whatever it means to be, whatever it means to achieve aesthetic excellence, though I wouldn't have known those terms specifically at that point in my life. But essentially, worded another way, that's essentially what I was thinking. I really fell in love at that point with the lyrics of Bob Dylan. And there, some bad consequences, actually. Not his fault, per se, but some bad consequences would come to that, too. So then I go on like a real hyper Dylan craze, obsession, specifically with his 60s music. I was specifically interested in that. I didn't really get into his Blood on the Tracks and Desire albums and things like that at that time. I was specifically interested in Blonde on Blonde. And I'm trying to remember what other albums really got me. I mean, Blonde on Blonde was huge for me. Bringing It All Back Home. And really this period of time in Bob Dylan's musical career output from around when he goes electric, really, with Like a Rolling Stone up through Blonde on Blonde. So like roughly those 3 years from like 65 to 68, I think it is. that output of his music, it was like, I cannot begin to explain to you the world that took me to in my mind. And the way that it made me feel. If there was a song that captured probably the way that I felt through the imagery that he sings, I think it would be Desolation Row. The lyrics to that one are just amazing. You know, just I'll just read to you the beginning of the lyrics just to give you an idea of the way that my mind, because I just felt that he was touching on he was painting my nerves with words somehow. They're selling postcards of the hanging. They're painting the passports brown. The beauty parlor is filled with sailors. The circus is in town. Here comes the blind commissioner. They've got him in a trance. One is tied to the tightrope walker, the other is in his pants. And the riot squad, they're restless, they need somewhere to go. As Lady and I look out tonight from Desolation Row. It's a really depressing song, but I was still in a deep state of depression at this time in my life, depression, anxiety, and like all kinds of psychological complexities go on in my mind. The end of the song. Yes, I received you yesterday about the time the doorknob broke. When you asked me how I was doing, was that some kind of joke? All these people that you mentioned, yes, I know them. They're quite lame. I had to rearrange their faces and give them all another name. Right now, I can't read too good. Don't send me no more letters, no. Not unless you mail them from Desolation Row. I felt like he's got this madness inside his mind, as do I, essentially. And nobody can relate to me because of the tortured consciousness I have. And unless you can relate to this tortured but brilliant, tragic consciousness that I have, don't bother. Like, that's the attitude that I start to develop in listening to Dylan. And then there's the song Sooner or Later. That's a really sad one. That song I'd play a lot. And that would become really depressing because it painted how I felt about the romantic relationship I would start, right? Because I'm trying to take you to how I get to where I'm thinking in South Beach. And if you understand the lyrics of Bob Dylan, specifically some of the songs that I'm citing, you begin to understand what's going on in my mind. And with Dylan, there's almost like a kind of arrogance in his tone at times. And I wanted to, honestly, I think I wanted to be Bob Dylan. I think in his song lyrics, if I could just sing them all the time and think about them all the time, it's like I could escape whoever Sean O'Connor was and be someone I thought who was really cool. I could embody the Bob Dylan-ness within me somehow. And I tried to adapt, like I tried to take Dylan-esque attitudes towards things. He became as much a poet to me as a philosopher. I took a lot from it. So, for example, I didn't mean to treat you so bad. You shouldn't take it so personal. I didn't mean to make you so sad. You just happened to be there. That's all. That began to be how I felt about the relationship I was starting with this girl at Florida Gulf Coast University. Actually, we didn't really get into any fights at that point, but I was constantly paranoid that there would be a fight. I was very cynical. I may have told you this before. I was always paranoid that she was wanting to screw other guys and that I was only going to want to screw other girls and that we were lying to ourselves about our capacity to be monogamous with each other. And I felt like this sense of misery and depression about it all. And I thought this nice girl can never relate to the sort of tortured consciousness that I have. And that when he says, I didn't mean to treat you so bad, you shouldn't take it so personal. I sort of saw, like, I had a really depressed, melancholy way about myself at times. And the way I was thinking was like, I'm not meaning to make your day any darker. Don't take it as such. And then he says, I didn't mean to make you so sad. You just happened to be there. That's all. Because I was a determinist, a fatalist, the essence of our relationships, whatever kinds of emotions it evoked, though I felt them and was very attached to her and it was all very romantic and nice and all of that, to me, it was just fate. And so this whole, you just happen to be there. That's all. To me, it was like there's this sort of dichotomy or paradox of there's this flush of intense first love emotions and insecurities and feelings, and yet this sort of fatalistic detachment from it. And the two are conflicting with each other and competing with each other. But sooner or later, one of us must know that you just did what you're supposed to do. Sooner or later, one of us must know that I really did try to get close to you. Again, just this fatalism about it. That whatever goes wrong in this relationship, because I saw it as doomed, because I saw everything in my life as doom. Doom was probably, especially by the time I'm at Florida Gulf Coast University, I'm smoking pot at this point, like all the time, having a lot of paranoia and anxiety. I just felt this overarching, all-encompassing, ontological sense of life, fundamental dogmatic doom of my consciousness. But whatever is going to be is going to be. It just is. Sooner or later, one of us must know that you just did what you're supposed to do. Sooner or later, one of us must know that I really did try to get close to you. What's the other one? The song is escaping my mind. I wish Rodney, my friend Rodney, was here. He probably knows Dylan better than I do. When he says in another song, I don't want to be, what is it? I want to be your lover, baby. I just want to be your lover, baby. I don't want to be your boss. Don't say I never warned you when your train gets lost. This is me really thinking like very arrogant. I start to think of myself as like, I'm the crazy, intense, wordy poet guy. And I'm thinking about these things and experiencing this complex torture you're never going to be able to relate to. That's what I'm thinking about, this distance between this girl and I and the sense of our relationship, one aspect of it. And I'm thinking, in my mind, I'm thinking there's no way you can keep up with the experiences I'm having in my mind. So don't say I never warned you when your train gets lost. It's like this arrogance almost that it's beginning to harden in my soul through these Dylan lyrics. I could go on and on and on about Bob Dylan. I will probably end up doing an entire chain of podcasts exclusively about Bob Dylan, and maybe even get some people who are really interested in him to join me in that one. There's so much to say about Bob Dylan that, this just scratches the surface of the relationship between some of the things his lyrics say and some of the kinds of things I'm beginning to feel. Now, remember, this is all having a sort of fusion with that John Lennon part of me, and that Jack Kerouac part of me, and that Charles Bukowski part of me. And sad to say, but that Bee Gees part of me, that sort of innocent, hopeless romantic, is sort of corroded. I start to view the Bee Gees as this symbol of young, stupid Sean who couldn't do anything and never had any friends. And I begin to hate the Bee Gees and really don't listen to them so much. And it becomes all about Bob Dylan, especially. But then there's also Jim Morrison. Jim Morrison's very different in many ways in terms of his impact on me than Bob Dylan, especially because Bob Dylan has had an all-enduring impact on me. That is to say, I'm still a Bob Dylan fan. I still love Bob Dylan. I still take a lot from his lyrics. I still relate to him in a lot of ways. I still think of him as one of the greatest poets of all time, even if I don't share a lot of his philosophical ideas. With Jim Morrison, he kind of hit me hard and fast with his influence, but it wasn't an all-enduring thing. But when Jim Morrison came into my life, he came in and really shaped a major part of who I was. You just can't understand who I was in my life without understanding the people that influenced me. And again, it's not this conventional, oh, I learned so much from my father and so much from my grandmother and like all these things. Yeah, a lot of my friends and family influenced me, but nothing influenced me so staunchly as these artists and thinkers. And Jim Morrison has probably the most depressing impact on me of virtually any artist that I allowed to impact my mind. He's up there with Rimbaud and Baudelaire too. They're also very depressing impacts. Jim Morrison. I would say the first thing to understand with respect to how I perceived Jim Morrison, I understood he was well liked by the female gender, female sex. And I envied that. Someone who always thought he was very ugly as a teenager. You know, you look in the mirror, you hate what the universe gives you, you cry, you punch the walls, and you think, why am I so ugly or what have you? And you start growing out your hair and wearing a beard, and you begin to think, I'm challenging the way I used to view myself. Smoke pot, and you think to yourself, like, I'm cleaning out my mind. I'm becoming this new person. And you're asking yourself, who is it then that I'm supposed to be? And you see somebody like Jim Morrison, who all the ladies like so much, and you think, then whatever it is he's doing, to be so cool, to be so liked as a poet, to be so liked as a performer, as an artist, and as a sex symbol, well, then I must do whatever it is that he's doing right. So there are like two aspects of Jim Morrison that really captivate me. One is the lyrics of his songs and what may or may not be implied from them. And then there's also the other aspects of his persona and the way that he performed too, because I was very taken by, for example, the live albums that I had of his. And, you know, when he would sort of talk in between songs and say certain things and say them in certain ways. And I watched the interviews and I watched the movies about him and all these things. To me, Jim Morrison was the ultimate hippie poet. That's how I perceived him, as a hippie poet. And his lyrics touched on things that I had never heard anyone touch on in a particular way. Specifically the song, The End. There's a song that evokes a lot of pain in my soul, just the memory of listening to it. I have this memory. I mean, I was really obsessed with this song and the Doors and Jim Morrison, and somehow trying to like really experience it in a real hippie-ish and spiritual way. So this is early in the FGCU days, before I had a girlfriend I told you of. And this particular girl wants to hang out. And so we go back to my dorm. And I said, you want to listen to the Doors? Sure. So we just sort of listen, and I play The End by The Doors, and it's the live version. And I just lay on the ground and play the music really loud. And I don't know if I sing along or whatever it is I'm doing, but I'm just sort of like very entranced, laying on the ground, letting the music take me. And she gets very bored and wants to not stay. And that would be the end of that prospective relationship. But the end is about death. Death was my greatest of all fears, remains my greatest of all fears, and my greatest of all hatreds with the way the universe appears to be. And Jim Morrison is able to embrace death or not sound so afraid of it. And he says some crazy, that's a crazy song by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, it's like obscene. The End by The Doors. So you have to understand, right? I was smoking a lot of pot by the time I was very in the depths of the song, right? And a lot of times when I would get mad high, I would think that I was dying. And so death became at the forefront of my mind a lot. And that Jim Morrison was addressing this so aggressively was attractive to me as someone I could relate to. Though I couldn't understand how he could be so, apparently it seems at times, at peace with it. And, you know, there's some obscene things where he talks about wanting to, what is it? You know, he talks about when he says, the killer awoke before dawn. He put his boots on. He took a face from the ancient gallery, and he walked on down the hall. He went to the room where his sister lived, and then he paid a visit to his brother, and then he walked on down the hall, and he came to a door, and he looked inside. Father, yes, son, I want to kill you. Mother, I want to... That's fucking crazy. And I don't even know how I wrapped my mind around that, except that it swam into my consciousness. And I'm just thinking, this guy's crazy a little bit. And I'm thinking, maybe I'm supposed to be crazy. Maybe art is crazy. Like, you see how this stuff like can mess with your mind if you're not interpreting it really carefully? And if you read these lyrics, come on, yeah, fuck, 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 fuck. Come on, baby, fuck me, baby, yeah, fuck, fuck, fuck. Come on, baby, fuck me, fuck, 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 fuck. All right, fuck, fuck, kill, kill. I mean, this is some crazy stuff. And he says, this is the end, my beautiful friend. This is the end, my only friend, the end. It hurts to set you free, but you'll never follow me. That's one of the most brutally sad things that I ever heard. And I thought that explained me really well. And I thought that was inevitably my girlfriend and I, as I would continue listening to the song over and over again. I thought, it hurts to set you free, but you'll never follow me. I thought there's no way she was going to go into the kind of consciousness that I was striving for, whatever that means. The notions of consciousness begin around that year to really take center in terms of my interests, what it means to have a particular kind of consciousness. And Jim Morrison, you learn that Jim Morrison likes to trip on drugs a lot. He died of a heroin overdose. So I begin to embrace too the pot, and I smoke salvia and do my own sort of tripping in that way. And I'm sort of captivated by Jim Morrison's use of the word fuck, and sort of like trying to say shocking things. I begin to write really shocking poetry. One of the most insane things I ever wrote was Jesus amens my cock. I wrote. I don't know why. I don't know. That was me trying to be Jim Morrison and say that. Went to this poetry reading, and I was so entranced by the way Jim Morrison, when he would do a show based on the live recordings that I would listen to, he would like scream a lot and he would try to be like shamanistic. So I go to this poetry reading and I read the most, for lack of better terms, obscene poetry that I've written that I could find, like what I had just said to you. And I get interrupted in the middle because of all my screaming, and I get asked to leave. And there's another poet, and then I get asked to leave. I don't remember like exactly how the intervention within the reading I'm doing goes, but I remember having to actually run out of the cafe with my girlfriend and another friend of mine. And as I'm being, I guess, chased out, I remember screaming something like, I want everybody to know that such and such kind of language and such words are not permitted here, and we're being attacked for our freedom of speech, or something like that. I really tried to cause a scene. Really, to me, I thought I was putting on some kind of revolutionary show. And then we come back, I guess, the next week, and the owner sits down with me and says, you're not invited to speak here again. You're not invited to be here again. And I ask why. And he says, within the 24 hours, first 24 hours of you being here the last time, I got more calls than I've ever got here before. Something like that, he says. And he tries to draw me some kind of diagram of the brain and explain how, through my use of obscenity and screaming, that it was a neurological fact that I had induced shock in people. And I wasn't going to have that. And I said, fine. And then there's a similar story where we put on this Earth Day festival at Florida Gulf Coast University, and I helped organize the poetry reading aspect of that. And I go up and I'm reading this poem about drugs. I don't remember exactly how it goes in its original form, but I remember it was something like heroin, something, 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 vodka, something, 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 marijuana, something, 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 cocaine, something, something, something. Like, it was really, it was a poem about drugs, and a very little poem about drugs. And as I'm reading it, this is an outdoor poetry reading as part of the university's Earth Day Festival. They take the mic from me and someone explains to me to the side that the mayor is in town, and that I'm making things look very bad, and that this is inappropriate. And similar to the stunt I pulled at the other poetry reading, I start screaming something like, I'm free, they can't tell me what to say, they can't tell me what to do. So you see how like Jim Morrison in my brain becomes like this excuse to cause disruptive scenes. I think, as I understood, he actually got arrested for masturbating in public at a concert. And to me, that's just part of his brilliance. Not that I ever went that far, but that's that spirit, that almost like as if there could be an ethos to that, an aesthetic theory, a mainstream aesthetic theory to it. I began to embrace that way of thinking. And I became this kind of person who was gonna, wants to cause scenes as part of an aesthetic show accompanying whatever kinds of poems I was going to read. And that's how I begin to think about the universe and think about myself. And then it gets even worse because I'm also sinking my brain into Rimbaud and Baudelaire. And I will just touch the very beginning of the Rimbaud and then call it an end today, because I don't like to go on for more than an hour, really, because I know you've got so many wonderful things else that you need to do. There are a lot of other people out there that I hope that you will learn about other than me. But I want you to see like how all of these different people are shaping my aesthetic thinking and my ontological thinking in particular, and how this will begin to influence where I see myself in terms of conceptualizing where I want to be, as well as who I want to be. So then there's Rimbaud. I think I was exposed to Rimbaud. Rimbaud comes up a lot in Bob Dylan. I don't know if he comes up a lot, but he comes up in a Dylan song or two and a Dylan interview or two. Rimbaud comes up with Jim Morrison interviews. Rimbaud comes up in Kerouac. Rimbaud is like one of those names that you see by all the people that you love. So if all of my favorite artists are giving kudos to Rimbaud, I need to know who Rimbaud is. So then I am exposed to Un Season d'Enfer. Is that what it's called in French? A Season in Hell, as it's translated in English. I know I talked to you a little bit about Rimbaud before in an earlier part of this, but I can't emphasize enough the impact that this has on my brain. With Rimbaud, it's a couple of things that's really attractive at the onset. First of all, he appears to be someone of incredible influence. It goes back to the 19th century. He's French. Really, he's my introduction to French poetry. And his poems, though he writes different kinds of poems, he also writes prose poetry, which I had never really been exposed to before, so-called prose poetry. And Rimbaud is considered, when you start to read about him, he's considered this like prodigy, a genius poet who writes his best work in, like at 18 years old, 19, early 20s. By 30, he's abandoned poetry. And he's considered just this crazy genius. And he has this very tortured soul. He's almost as if his concept of geniusness is akin to unbearable hypersensitivity, for lack of better terms. I'm going to leave it there. I think that's a good place to stop it. So just leaving you with a context line to sort of like sum it up. So it's 2006 at this point. It's spring of 2006. My brain is plunged in Bukowski, Ginsberg, Kerouac, Lenin, Simon and Garfunkel, Bob Dylan, Jim Morrison, and Arthur Rimbaud. And each of them has these aspects of sort of philosophical, ontological, or aesthetic ideas that I'm wrapping my mind around. And they're not necessarily having like the most positive impact you could imagine on me. And this is all extracurricular. This is all stuff, that I'm wrapping my mind around in an almost solipsistic kind of way, as opposed to dissecting them with other people or learning about it at school. This is, in fact, what I abandon my classes, run away from my classes, don't attend my classes at FGCU. Instead, I'm reading this stuff and thinking about it and trying to embody and embrace it. And it's in the context of this that I start thinking about how I don't want to be an American anymore. I don't want to live in America anymore. I want to move to England and become a rich and famous poet in England. And I'll tell you more about that and how Rimbaud and Baudelaire, in fact, also seize my brain and influence the person I am at South Beach in this concept I have of the so-called starving artist, really, or myself as an artist, and how I eventually break out of that mold and what that means about where I'm supposed to be in life and where I'm supposed to live, etc. So thank you so much for taking the time to listen to the Public Comment podcast about philosophy and politics for critical, creative, and introspective thinkers. I hope that you have a fantastic day, and I will be chatting with you just a little bit later. Feel free to check out my Patreon page, by the way, and donate to the cause of the show. Feel free to check out other aspects of the blog, publiccomment.blog. Check out my new lexicon, where I explain, sort of define my terms and why I think what I think based on sort of basic concepts, why I think about those basic concepts as I do, sources and rationales, etc. Thanks again, folks. Gonna end this stream now. Have a great day.